there's a term called Last Supper eating. I'll see this a lot when people think, okay, my diet starts tomorrow, and then they'll participate in this Last Supper, and then gorge themselves anticipating going without. And this scarcity drives overconsumption. Welcome to the Complete Nutrition Podcast.
The podcast where we break free from the dieting cycle and explore sustainable, realistic ways to improve your health.
I'm Kylie, a registered dietitian with over 10 years of experience.
And I'm Spencer, and I've been eating food my entire life. And I happen to be a nurse.
Each week, we dive into the science, psychology, and strategies behind mindful eating and sustainable change.
Whether you're here to transform your relationship with food, learn how to make lasting lifestyle changes, or are simply curious about what true health looks like, you're in the right place.
We'd invite you to subscribe and tag along if you'd like to stop dieting and start living. This episode is brought to you by the vitamin B1, otherwise known as thiamine. It was first discovered in the early 1900s during research on a disease called beriberi. And beriberi is characterized by weakness and nerve damage, confusion, and ultimately death.
Where were they finding beriberi?
And it was in the Asian countries, and they found that it was associated with the transition. They call it polished rice when they went from brown rice to white rice. And then ultimately they linked it to a deficiency of thiamine, and that is removed from the whole grain to the refined grain. However, now they add it back in. So
that's ironic. So they process the rice and then remove it and then add it back in.
Well, when you process whole grains to be more refined, they take away the outer, it's called the bran and the endosperm, and that has a lot of the nutrients in it. And so before we understood the nutritional value of whole grain, that took away a lot of the vitamins. And then, beriberi, and then in the States, a similar thing happened with folic acid too, with the neural tube defects. And now they add that all back in. And so really the biggest thing is just fiber that's missing.
And that's if you buy white grain rice. What did I say?
White.
Yeah. I said white. Whoops. White grain rice.
It is the fortified, yes.
That's missing the bran, right?
Oh, it's missing the fiber, correct.
So if you buy brown rice, does it have that naturally?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So brown rice has
vitamin
B1. Okay.
Yeah. And it's also seen in alcoholism. So I work in the hospital, and we'll see people who have like pancreatitis or going through withdrawals, and they have to come to the hospital first before they can go to rehab. And there's something called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which, because how alcohol is metabolized, it inhibits the absorption of thiamine in the intestine. So people present with a severe deficiency of thiamine. So we'll give IV thiamine to people who are coming in with a history of alcohol abuse, and it's manifested through neurological disorders and delirium and confusion, and then we give loads of it through IV. Anyway, so it was determined that this thiamine was causing all of these conditions, and it was impacting our neurological system. So what it does in our body, it's considered a coenzyme, which we've talked about this before. Coenzyme helps to drive metabolism. Without it, that metabolic cycle stops. And so it helps convert carbohydrates into energy. It also helps break down protein. And it's essential for nerve function and cognitive function. And then without that, we see those deficiencies. And it's in whole grains, like we commented, and it's also in legumes and pork, as well as sunflower seeds and macadamia nuts, and then fortified foods like your cereals. Your cereals have lots of different B vitamins and are considered an excellent source of thiamine.
I know cereals do not mean just breakfast cereals. It means like grains, right?
Yes, but
Also
this in
breakfast cereals.
particular is talking about breakfast cereals. Like
Oh,
your Captain Crunch and your like Fruity Pebbles, they are fortified. That's why I always tell parents when parents are really worried that their kids aren't getting enough nutrition, I always ask, well, do they like cereal? Because I mean, that's like a bowl of a multivitamin.
huh.
They fortify a lot with the breakfast cereals. So,
You
yeah.
sound like the cereal companies bought you out. Just kidding.
Yeah.
No,
No.
that's good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you meant like breakfast cereal when you said fortified food. So,
Yes, I do. I did mean breakfast cereal.
Okay. Well, today, so we're talking about how to get out of the yo-yo dieting, and that's what the subject of this podcast is: yo-yo dieting and the psychology behind making peace with food, but still being able to create healthy, sustainable changes.
So we will be talking about our own emotional eating and our own stories. So this is a heads up or a trigger warning for anyone who may have a history of eating disorders or disordered eating, that we will be talking about this. And I just want to make sure that everyone is informed and knows what we'll be talking about today. So I wanted to talk about this earlier on. I feel like there's so much that we are wanting to talk about, but I feel like this is something that we will address again and again during our podcast. So we wanted to jump on and discuss this topic.
Which is yo-yo dieting. What is yo-yo dieting, Kylie?
And I would say, for the most part, anyone who has gone on a diet and you're not able to sustain it, so maybe you lose the weight and then it's really hard to sustain, or it's not a sustainable change, and then you fall off the bandwagon and you either regain the weight or regain the weight and then some, and then you recommit and do another diet. And typically there's a name for that. It's called the deprivation cycle. Have you heard of that before?
Yeah, talking with you.
Oh, just with me?
Yeah.
I'm curious if you'd ever heard it in other settings.
Not that I
Okay.
remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the deprivation cycle is when we make a rule, or essentially we say we're going to go on a diet. And so maybe you say, okay, I'm not going to eat sugar. And then we start the cycle, and then we start feeling good. Maybe if weight loss is our goal, you start losing weight. And you continue to follow this extreme or this rule or this restriction. And then all you can think about is the food that you're restricting, or the things that you're missing out on. Eventually, people will reach a breaking point. And in psychology, this is called the what the hell effect, of when you reach the point, and let's say someone brings brownies to work and you have a brownie and you think, oh shoot, I just broke my diet.
What the hell?
Yeah,
I
what
was
the
gonna
heck?
eat
I'm
some
gonna
more.
I'm gonna have half the pan. And so you usually crash and burn. It's not just a couple of brownies, it's a lot. And then we feel guilty and embarrassed and ashamed and mad at ourselves. And sometimes there's this sub-cycle that I'll see that drives more of this overeating. And then eventually we'll re-motivate ourselves and recommit and think, okay, next time this is going to be different. Next time I'll have more willpower, and next time it's going to, like, I'll be able to follow through with this. And then the cycle starts over again, and it's the same story over and over again. And we do it with different diets. Sometimes we do it the same diet thinking that it will be different, but we're driving a psychological process that is designed to fail, because as human beings, we don't do well in deprivation.
Or with absolutes, it seems like.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And I was going to ask you too, and talk about our own experiences because you grew up wrestling, and do you feel like you ever felt this with some of the things that you did to like make weight for wrestling?
I mean, I guess, but it was very different because I had like, it wasn't because I was trying to like lose weight because I thought that I needed to lose weight. I was like trying to make weight for wrestling, and it was certainly like probably unhealthy. Like maybe I would be taller if I hadn't been cutting weight all the time for wrestling. But
Spencer's a shorter person, a shorter male.
somewhat shorter. I'm perfectly average
He's
size.
he's a perfect size. He's about my height.
Yeah, yep. Anyway, so maybe like
Do you ever feel like after you did you made your weight, like after you were done, that you binged or overdid it
yeah, I
after?
definitely did. Like as soon as I would get my weight in, and I
Yeah.
like made it by like however like few ounces I would usually make the weight by, I would immediately go up to the bench and just like gorge myself on a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe that was like, I guess, a form of yo-yo dieting, but I didn't feel like it really affected my mindset with food that
That's
much
good.
necessarily.
And probably because it was like your outcome was just to make weight for your match and then it was done. It wasn't
Yeah.
something that was consistent.
Yeah, because I didn't care about it outside of the wrestling.
Yeah.
I would just eat whatever
Yeah.
I wanted to. I mean, I was a teenage boy. So
Yeah. I definitely, when I was very first in college, I had gained a bunch of weight like the freshman. It was more than 15. And then definitely like tried to restrict, and I would try and eat a really small breakfast and a really small lunch, and then would come home and be ravenous and be thinking about food, and then gorge myself, and then recommit the next day to like try and limit myself.
And this is because you thought that you were gaining weight, or you were afraid of.
I had, which I mean, it was like a natural, like I think sometimes we think of high school and we think all the time people are like, I was in high school, I was this weight, but I was a teenager then. So I naturally, like, as I was growing and developing into my womanhood, but yeah, I mean, I was definitely more so much more so then than now, but definitely in this diet culture of feeling like I wanted to be back at my high school weight, and was definitely in the thick of this deprivation cycle.
How did you get out of it? Did you eventually grow out of it while you were in high school, or was it not till years later?
I would say, I mean, going through nutrition classes and being introduced to a totally different way of thinking with intuitive eating and mindful eating, and I mean, principles that we'll talk about today of this abundance mindset that all foods fit, and that food shouldn't be feared, and that foods can be included. Brownies and chocolate are all okay, and totally changed my world. Totally was not what I expected going into becoming a dietitian. And
you thought it would be about like dieting.
I thought it would be like food rules, and I thought, okay, like being healthy.
It's even in the name, dietitian.
Yeah, like being healthy looks a certain way, and I totally expected that, and it was not that way at all, and it definitely healed my relationship with food, and
Education is important.
Yeah, it is.
So for those that are maybe stuck in a similar sounding cycle, how do you get out of it? How do you break the cycle?
So first of all, to stop having that deprivation, you need to stop having food rules. And when I say this, and I think when people hear me as a dietitian saying like, you can eat all of these things and it's okay to have these foods, people feel like we're throwing nutrition out the window. We still want to focus on nutrition, but in a more gentle way of adding foods in that food groups that we're missing, instead of focusing on restricting. So many people come to me and they say, okay, what foods give me a list. What foods should I be adding? What food should I be eating? And what food should I be restricting or not eating? And when we focus on what to take away, it puts us into the scarcity mindset that drives this deprivation cycle.
So what is the scarcity mindset?
So we live in these two different mindsets. We live in either the scarcity or abundance mindset. And scarcity mindset is definitely this mindset of I can't have, I shouldn't have, this is going to make me fat. Food labels, there's good foods, there's bad foods, or forbidden foods. And really focusing on what foods that we're trying to restrict or what foods we're trying to take out. Some of this, there's a term called Last Supper eating, I'll see this a lot when people think, okay, my diet starts tomorrow, and then they'll participate in
Hear
this
that all the
Last
time.
Supper, and then gorge themselves anticipating going without. And this scarcity drives overconsumption. And so, yeah, we see it with the Last Supper eating. I'll even see it when people come to see me as a dietitian. I'll do a 24-hour recall where I will ask them, well, what did you eat yesterday? Tell me what you ate yesterday. And they always laugh and say, oh, yesterday's a bad day. I knew I was coming here. So like I went ham on things. And yeah, so scarcity mindset drives this overconsumption, this deprivation cycle. On the flip side, the abundance mindset is when we know and we feel safe in knowing that all of these foods are available and that we will allow ourselves to have these foods. So instead of saying I can't have, I shouldn't have, it's more of these phrases of all foods fit, I can eat all foods are okay, and I can always have more later. And it comes from knowing and truly believing that, and giving ourselves unconditional permission to eat the foods that we're wanting, that we can get out of this deprivation cycle and out of this scarcity mindset. And there's a process called habituation. Have you heard of it? It's a common psychology term. I use it, well, obviously for food, but yeah, have you heard of it?
It just sounds like exposure therapy.
Yeah. So food habituation is when we expose ourselves or allow ourselves to have these foods that are forbidden over and over again until you get to a point where you truly believe that you can always have more. And then it takes away the fixation or the appeal that some of these foods have because they're no longer forbidden. You can have them at any time. And then suddenly we can look at foods like a broccoli or a cake with the same emotional reaction and choose what's going to make us feel good in all the senses. What's going to make us happiest, what's going to make us feel good. It's going to be the salad sometimes, and sometimes it's going to be the cake. But having the options and knowing that both are allowed keeps us in that abundance mindset.
I think what's helpful about thinking about the abundance mindset is that with the scarcity mindset, you are thinking about, like you said, taking things out, and then you're always craving those things. And I'm probably I'm just repeating everything you said, but what stood out to me is with the abundance mindset is you're adding all you're adding all the food in that you can eat, and then maybe this is silly, but you'll be able to eat more of whatever food, and then you'll be full more, and you won't have to worry about trying to like keep yourself from eating all the food that you want to because you're starving. Like you'll be full already because you have a balanced diet and ate everything already. So
and you're satisfying. Like sometimes you say, oh, I really want, I don't know, let's say a donut, and then you think, oh, I shouldn't eat that, that's unhealthy, and then you eat an apple, but then you still want the donut. Then you eat some crackers and cheese, but then you still want the donut. Then you eat some veggies and hummus, but you still want the donut, and then eventually you have the donut. And so yes, you could, in terms of like caloric intake, you could have avoided all those other calories and just had the donut and moved on your merry way. But I did want to talk about, I think this is the best non-food example of the scarcity and abundance mindset that we all have experienced. Do you remember the COVID-19 toilet paper crisis?
That's an excellent example.
So we all were in this scarcity mindset, and I don't know if this was, I'm assuming this was across the board nationwide. I don't know about around the world, but here in our state where we live in the States, we definitely had a shortage of toilet paper. And I remember going to the grocery store, and sometimes there wasn't any toilet paper, and going to multiple stores and finding it at like Home Depot. And then there was always these signs that said limit 2 per customer. And so we all were in the scarcity mindset where it was driving overconsumption. We were worried about going without, so we were buying more. Most of us had a great stash at home, but including myself. I had a stash at home, but it didn't matter whether I needed any or not. I always looked for toilet paper at the grocery store because I didn't know if I would be able to get it again. And so I would buy my limit over and over again. So my stash kept growing because I was worried and didn't know what the future held. And so that scarcity drove this overconsumption.
You were like the video of the man that the police officers literally raiding his home and taking out stacks of toilet paper.
Okay, I was not that bad. I was living alone at the time. I guess you were over on the weekends, but I did not have that much. But I did go and check and make sure that I had enough, and always was double checking because it was so scarce.
So to compare that with food, it's like if you had stacks and stacks of donuts in your house, but then the whole world wanted donuts, so you went out and bought more donuts when you already had all the donuts you needed. That's a silly analogy, but
Well, and I mean,
that's what I could think of.
the same, I mean, really putting it into food perspective, anticipating going without, because there's not a true scarcity of donuts, but we put that scarcity on ourselves. And then we feel like we need to go and eat whatever food because we're anticipating that we're going to go without. So it's a little bit different because it's self-imposed and there's not a true scarcity, but because it's self-imposed, it still drives those same habits and that same reaction of overconsumption. So on the flip side, we're all in the abundance mindset currently, hopefully, for toilet paper. I don't think about toilet paper until our stash gets low. And then I think, oh, okay, let's go to the grocery store. I know there will be some, and not only some, there will be multiple options, multiple prices, different different softness. And I've got lots of different options, and I feel very safe and secure that I can always get more later. And because of that, I don't think about toilet paper. And it's not on my grocery list every single week. And the same idea with food is when we feel like we can always have these foods that appeal, the fixation, the thinking about it all the time, the cravings definitely is at bay. And we think about it when we really are wanting it and are in the mood for it.
So do people, like your patients, when you tell them this about the abundance mindset and how that's the way to go, do they accept it? Are they able to do that? Because it sounds like somewhat opposite of, I guess, what popular culture tells us.
Right. Well, and it makes sense because I'm basically telling people to eat more of their cravings, like more of the quote unquote bad foods.
Sounds counterintuitive.
And I think it's really scary, and people think that it is unhealthy and they feel like they'll go off the deep end. And the truth is that you probably will. Like there's a messy middle is what they call it, where you do overeat and you overconsume as you're working through that food habituation and really exposing yourself through that. And once you really settle into this place that you know that those foods are still available and those foods are something that you can get again and again, then you start to heal that piece of you and move into that. It's definitely not an overnight thing. And can take time. And some people think, oh, like I just eat it until it makes me sick and then I don't ever want it again. And that's not the point. It's to still allow yourself to have it as much as you want and then get to a place where, again, emotionally you can look at a cake or broccoli and have that same emotional reaction.
Like what you said, you can have it as much as you want, but your desire for that food will go down as you have it in abundance. You don't need to be craving it.
Right.
You'll want it
right.
less.
Right. And that's that habituation. And I think people also confuse this and feel like I'm telling people to throw health out the window and saying, okay, go eat whatever you want. And we still want to focus on foods that our body might need more of, or if we have a certain health condition, we're still going to be focusing on eating within the lens of this gentle nutrition. So less of this rigid rules, restrictions, good foods, bad foods. And like I think of I work with people with inflammatory bowel disease, or like people with diabetes, or people with celiac disease. And there are different dietary recommendations that these people are recommended to follow. And I would say the key is to focus on what to add in as opposed to what to take away. Because if we're focusing on what to add in, that naturally will start to balance out. And the food groups that maybe we're eating in excess will start to balance out in a more appropriate level. But we're not putting ourselves in that scarcity mindset, because we can still have those foods, but we're trying to add in more of the foods that we need. And
what else can we do to get out of the deprivation cycle? Because you're talking about, like, instead of focusing on taking away, you focus on what to add in.
yeah.
What else can you do to make yourself more comfortable with the abundance cycle, I guess, or the abundance mindset?
Well, yeah. I mean, I feel like if this is really triggering, or if this was something that seems really hard to grasp, I would recommend sitting down with either a dietitian and or a therapist.
Yeah, this is very psychological.
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. And it's interesting too. I work with a lot of people, I mean, of all sorts, but another example of, I will sometimes have adults who, as children, food wasn't available, or they lived in poverty. And this is actually good to note too, that the abundance mindset is definitely a place of privilege, and that a lot of people around the world are not able to live in the abundance mindset because they don't have their necessary needs met. So we do want to acknowledge and hold space for that too, that sometimes this is a great concept, but it sometimes can't apply to all sociodemographic forms. And so I have worked with adults who grew up in impoverished situations, and they didn't have access to food. And then because they've lived and grown up in this scarcity mindset, they have a really hard relationship with food currently, because they were raised in a place of deficit or without food. And so and there's definitely a place, it's kind of like healing some food trauma. And I mean, that's definitely a place for healing. So yeah, working with professionals that can help you through this journey of healing emotionally. And if you're in a place of a socio-demographic situation where eating in abundance or having all food options isn't available, I would still recommend reaching out to your healthcare providers. And there are a lot of community resources and a lot of centers, and at least I know in our state, if you're in this, I don't know if it's just, we live in Utah, but if you call 211, they can get you connected with people that can help you with groceries and connect you with resources that you are needing.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
That's good to know. I'm going to spread that info. Okay. Well, we're reaching the end of our time, and obviously, we can't, a lot of this is so psychological and would require a pretty deep dive, and we're no psychologists. So this is like a pretty basic overview of this, but like Kylie said, if you feel like any of these speak to you, you should definitely talk to a dietitian like Kylie, because she specializes in a lot of this, or a therapist as well, because there's a lot that goes into this for sure. And just a quick review, I just want to make sure that I understand. So we talked about yo-yo dieting, which is just the switch between feeling good about everything that you're doing with your diet and feeling like you're on top of it, and then failing, and then feeling super guilty, and then you go back and forth over and over again. And then we talked about how to get out of that, which is to bring in more food rather than take away food, which is pretty counterintuitive.
Correct. And in summary, I would say if you are wanting activities or something to work on from this episode, if you feel like you're stuck in this deprivation cycle, the scarcity mindset, I would get out a piece of paper and start to jot down all of your food rules. So foods that you feel like are quote unquote bad, foods that you feel like you shouldn't be eating, and really identify what food rules that are carrying your food choices and where your foundation of your food choices are. And then I would also recommend starting to heal that relationship with those foods, starting to allow yourself to eat some of those forbidden foods and know it's going to be a messy middle. It's going to be scary. You're probably going to over consume on those foods. And then to check in mentally with what you're feeling throughout your day, and depending on what your food choices are, and thinking, okay, am I in the scarcity mindset? And trying to shift those thoughts from I shouldn't be eating this, I can't be eating this, to I think a really helpful phrase is I can always have more later. And then I also had, this is a client that this was her phrase that really helped her, is she would ask herself, what will make me happy? And I think happy is a pretty good umbrella term, that there are foods that might make our body feel happy or might make us emotionally feel happy. And that phrase helped her to stay in this abundance mindset as she was trying to navigate some of these emotions, or what foods are going to make me feel happy. Because some of our health conditions, sometimes different foods don't make our bodies feel happy, but then there are times where that doesn't matter, and emotionally some of these foods are going to make you happy in a different way. So yeah, those two phrases, what's going to make me feel happy, and then I can always have more later, to get yourself into this place of unconditional permission to eat, and then focusing on what foods to add in, foods and foods groups that you feel like you are missing. So go out there and start to heal your relationship with food.
Thanks, everybody.
If you are listening, we imagine that you are probably on your own health journey. Thank you so much for letting us be a part of this journey. We want to invite you to consider these 3 questions as a weekly personal check-in.
The first question is that maintaining a positive mindset is crucial for success. So, what are your victories and your wins from the past week?
Second question, what are your intentions or focus or goals for this next week? Reminder that the simpler and more realistic, the better.
And the last question is, what are you going to do to accomplish this goal? Be specific, and we invite you to write this down somewhere. What specific things will you do to reach this goal of yours?
Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you are listening to, we would invite you to subscribe. We'd also invite you to leave a review. If you do, you will be entered into our monthly drawing to win a box of meal deliveries. Take a screenshot of your review and send it to Complete Nutrition, complete with a K, completenutrition@gmail.com. You can also check us out online at www.complete-nutrition.com or on Instagram at complete_nutrition.